Hello, 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 Crime Squad podcast listeners. It's me, your host, Natasha, here with another episode drop for you. Last episode was part of one of a special series I'm putting out called Death in Thunder Bay. If you haven't listened to part 1, I recommend you stop and go listen to that first. It gives a lot of background and covers the first 2 Indigenous youth to wind up dead in Thunder Bay. Crime Squad podcast is my true passion project, one I invest a lot of time in. On average, it takes around 15 to 30 hours to research, write, and record each episode, and this is all done by yours truly. If you enjoy the content, please be sure to rate the podcast wherever you listen. Oh, and of course, subscribe so you don't miss any of my episode releases. I only cover true crime cases in Canada, both solved and unsolved. Cold cases factor heavily in my content in the hopes that I can renew interest or someone listening will have a piece of the puzzle that could crack the case and hopefully provide some closure to families. I also cover special interest cases, usually as a special series by Crime Squad podcast. The first was The Devil's Playground, a series about the numerous deaths at the Elgin Middlesex Detention Centre in London, Ontario, my hometown. The second release is Death in Thunder Bay. All right, squad, that's it for the intro. Now let's get into today's episode. Thunder Bay. I talked a lot about it in part 1 of the series. If you look at Thunder Bay's website, there's a lot of propaganda regarding Indigenous relations and how Thunder Bay has a strong belief in the value Indigenous peoples bring to Turtle Island, or North America as Westerners know it. But are they really putting principles into practice? This episode is going to explore the deaths of Paul Panacheese, Robyn Harper, Reggie Bushie, Kyle Morriseau, and Jordan Wabasse. The first part explored the last days of Jethro Anderson and Curran Strang. These names are the names of youth who have died in Thunder Bay in a relatively short timeline, most of whom were in Thunder Bay to continue their educations from their rural homes on reservations in northern Ontario. As a result of these deaths, Indigenous community leaders in the media began to speak out and ask, what is going on? They refused to be silent about the 7 deaths that happened in just 11 years. Finally, their demands were answered, and a coroner's inquest began in October of 2015. 15 years after the death of Jethro Anderson, who at that point had tragically been deceased for the same amount of years he'd been alive. The inquest was scheduled to go through until March of 2016, and approximately 190 witnesses were called. The final report was released in June of 2016. Recommendations were identified and communicated to the City of Thunder Bay on how to improve Indigenous and non-Indigenous relations, some of which we'll explore here. Despite the reported progress that's been made, there are multiple stories in the news about Thunder Bay's still corrupt police service. Here's some fast facts for you. In 2018, the police chief in Thunder Bay at the time was named J.P. Levesque. During his career as a police chief, he came under fire in 2015 for how the force had handled the death of 41-year-old Stacey DeBungie. During the investigation, police ruled out foul play almost immediately, and a later review into the conduct of the Thunder Bay Police Department found that the death was ruled non-criminal prematurely. The report, conducted by the Office of the Independent Police Review Director, indicated the allegations of misconduct during the investigation into Stacey's death were, in fact, substantiated. That was 2015. 2 years later, in May of 2017, the Ontario Provincial Police charged the 53-year-old police chief with breach of trust and attempting to obstruct justice. This stemmed from allegations of collusion with then-Mayor Keith Hobbs. Police Chief Levesque and Mayor Hobbs were fairly buddy-buddy, which is why he reportedly disclosed to the mayor that he was being investigated by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, or RCMP. And he was being investigated for extortion. A judge ended up acquitting Chief Levesque of the charges, indicating that the prosecution, which is called the Crown in Canada, had been unable to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Levesque had intentionally attempted to interfere with the investigation against the mayor. Okay, so I don't really understand that, because literally, as an officer telling a person who's under investigation that they are under investigation, I'm pretty sure is attempting to obstruct the investigation, but what can I say? I'm not a judge and I didn't make that decision. Also, get this, in 2018, Police Chief Levasse quietly retired from the force. In his place was Sylvia Houth, a 30-year-old veteran of the force. She would be the first female appointed to this high position, and the community was hopeful she would tackle the ongoing issues of mistreatment of Indigenous people by the Thunder Bay Police Force. Sounds great, right? Wrong. In June of 2022, Sylvia Houth was suspended from the force because she was under investigation by the Ontario Civilian Police Commission. The allegations were serious and focused on misconduct by Chief Houth, specifically that she failed to address allegations against another officer and then allegedly provided misinformation about the investigation into that particular officer to the Thunder Bay Police Services Board. This seems to be a trend in Thunder Bay, because she was also alleged to have failed to take appropriate steps into looking into wrongdoings of other members of the police force she resided over. None of these allegations have been proven, though, and it's not because she hasn't seen her day in court. It's because she won't see her day in court, because Police Chief Sylvia Houth announced her retirement. The same day, it was announced she would have to go to court to address these allegations. Because she won't be part of the police force when the case is to be reviewed in court, the charges have now been dismissed. Paul Panacheese was born in 1985 to his mother Mary Ann and father Joe. He had two siblings, and the family lived in Mishkigulgamin, First Nation. Photographs of Paul in his late teens show a handsome young man with a light in his eyes. He has just a hint of a smile on his face and has close-cropped hair and a slender nose. There are around 1,000 people who live in Mishkigulgamin, which I'll shorten to Mish going forward. Their closest school only goes up to grade 10, so when Paul turned 17, he would be sent to Thunder Bay to complete his schooling. Like many Indigenous youth coming from remote reserves, Paul stayed at boarding houses during school. For whatever reason, in the 3 years he attended Dennis Franklin Cromartie High School, he would live at 10 different boarding homes. Each home had a different set of parents and a different way of doing things. That's a lot of move and change for a teenager to adjust to, all while trying to go to school and thrive in an environment so unlike the one he grew up in. As described in Tanya Talaga's book, Seven Fallen Feathers, one of these boarding houses was above a Chinese restaurant. It was, in reality, a small apartment, and there were 6 other teenage boys crammed into the space. Anyone who has experience with teenage boys knows they can be hungry. Growing up and watching my brother eat would shock me at how much his growing body could consume. But the nutrients are needed to build bodies and brains. Unfortunately, this particular boarding house, the parents would put padlocks on the cupboards and fridge, preventing the boys from eating outside of the times food was served. And if you weren't home when food was served, you weren't eating. I can't imagine what that must have felt like. This is supposed to be your home away from home, and yet you can't even head to the kitchen for a snack if you want something to eat. Paul's mother, Mary Ann, could tell her son was having a hard time. He had so many stories of the blatant racism he faced from Thunder Bay's white population. He would be called names, have things thrown at him from moving cars. And he was lonely. He missed his mother's cooking, the traditional foods like bannock and moose. She was very close with her son and decided in 2006 that she'd move to Thunder Bay to give Paul a place to live. He was going to be finishing high school soon and was overall in good spirits. He admitted to his mother that he had been experimenting with drugs, but not because he enjoyed it. He felt sometimes he had to do it just to fit in with the other kids. He said that he was ridiculed if he refused and called names like Goody Two-Shoes. November 10th, 2006 would be Paul's last night in this earthly realm. He had spent the night playing a poker game with friends. He wasn't drinking or using drugs that night. When he got home to his mother, she went upstairs to bed, satisfied that Paul was home safely. He began to make a quick snack, but just moments later, Mary Ann recalled hearing a loud thud. She ran down the stairs to find Paul lying on the floor. He did not have a pulse. Emergency services were called, but Paul would not wake up. He was transported to hospital and later died. The autopsy results were inconclusive. It was noted Paul was a healthy and well developed 21-year-old male and that his cause of death couldn't be attributed to alcohol or drug use. The cause of death was undetermined. The family of Paul Panacheese will likely always wonder what happened to him and why he wound up dead on the kitchen floor in Thunder Bay. Imagine you're 17 years old. You've come to Thunder Bay from hundreds of kilometers away from your isolated home and community. The city of Thunder Bay has over 100,000 people, and the place you come from has maybe 2,000 total residents. Thunder Bay is unlike anything you've ever seen or experienced. There are lots of vehicles, large buildings. It's a huge city compared to your small reserve in the bush. Maybe you get to live with a grandma, auntie, or uncle in the city, so at least you're around family. Or maybe you don't have that luxury. When you move into your boarding house, you're expected to live with complete strangers who are supposed to be your guardians. Maybe there's other kids there too, and you're all sizing each other up. You feel a sense of loneliness you never knew was possible. You're supposed to be starting high school, and you're lucky if you get a good meal in your belly before you go each day. At school, there are people like you, which is nice compared to the welcome you get from the residents of the city. They yell things at you from cars, telling you to go back to your reserve and calling you racist names. They throw things at you when you walk down the sidewalk. At school, though, you get asked if you want to hang out afterward. A bunch of kids are getting together to go to the mall or to the local parks where, hidden from view, they can drink booze and let loose. The alternative is for you to go back to the boarding house and do homework, so of course, partying sounds much more fun. At least you'll be around people you can make friends with, and then you won't feel so lonely or homesick. This is the reality of many Indigenous youth who come from their remote homes to finish their education in Thunder Bay. The Indigenous students that come to school in Thunder Bay typically attend Dennis Franklin Cromartie High School, which is run by the Northern Anishinaabe Education Council and funded by the federal government. The staff at the school aren't blind to the challenges faced by their students. They are so much more than teachers. They are witness to the uprooting and attempted adaptation into a completely new environment. A teacher named Greg Quachigan spoke to Tanya Talaga in an article in the Toronto Star on May 9, 2011, and he was quoted as saying the following, quote, "When the kids come to Thunder Bay, they're not used to being in the city and they have free time. Students get harassed for not joining. They get homesick. They miss traditional foods, wild meat. A lot don't have money," end quote. In reference to being harassed for not joining, Mr. Quachigan was alluding to Native gangs in the city. Students in the city would be lucrative targets for a gang to recruit as members. Because of this, the school faculty does everything it can to try and keep the kids protected from harm. There are just too many instances of violence in the city, too many arrests for public intoxication. The full commitment from staff includes some being on call 24 hours a day. They drive around and search local hangout spots where trouble could be brewing, especially if drugs and alcohol are involved. Like any teenagers, the youth try to avoid being caught by the teachers. After all, it would ruin a perfectly good night of partying. And partying makes them feel a sense of belonging, a way to numb the pain of their reality, if even just for a night. Robyn Harper was 18 years old when she flew to Thunder Bay from Kiwewan First Nation. Robyn lived with her parents and tended to prefer to be at home with them instead of out with friends. She liked spending time with family, especially her father. She was definitely a daddy's girl, and when she was finished with her education, she wanted to return home to take care of her father. Her father had actually had a work accident, which left him paralyzed from the waist down, so he needed extra help now and again. Robyn had only been in Thunder Bay a week when she was asked by a girl she knew, named Sky, if she wanted to get drunk with a bunch of other kids. They pooled their money together and found an adult who would purchase booze for them since they're underage. They bought a ridiculous amount of alcohol. It reminds me of my teenage years when I had no idea how to drink properly. The first time I ever got drunk, I was 15 years old, and I drank a Mickey of Absolute Lyman in 15 minutes. I drank it in shots. A Mickey is a Canadian term for a 200 milliliter bottle of alcohol. I was so shit faced, I began throwing up immediately, and my friends basically dragged me home. I'm lucky I didn't have to go to the hospital and that everything worked out okay for me. It wouldn't work out for Robyn, though. The group of kids, with booze in hand, made their way to a local park where they drank and smoked weed. Robyn asked Skye to make sure she got home okay if she got too drunk. Robyn wasn't used to drinking like this. By the time the get-together was winding down, the last drop of liquor drained from the bottles, Robyn couldn't stand without swaying or falling over. Everybody else ended up taking off, leaving Skye and Robyn in the park. Skye desperately tried to drag Robyn out of the park and to the bus stop, struggling under Robyn's size. She managed to get Robyn to the bus terminal where they waited, but an employee at the terminal was concerned with the group of youth, clearly drunk, and called the school counselors to come and intervene. Cheyenne Linklater arrived, and not only is she on staff at the high school, but she's actually Robyn's boarding parent as well. Cheyenne offered Skye and another girl a ride home, which they accepted, and after they got Robyn into the van, they climbed in too. They drove to Cheyenne's house first to drop Robyn off. This is all according to Skye. When Cheyenne was questioned about her own recollection of the incident, she actually said none of this happened. Cheyenne was apparently unaware of Robyn's drinking and didn't pick the girls up from the bus terminal. She apparently didn't get home from work until 4 a.m., according to what is written by Tanya Talaga in Seven Fallen Feathers. But Skye maintained Robyn was placed on the floor in the hallway in the recovery position. Now, this is the position usually recommended in first aid training to ensure a person doesn't choke if they vomit. It was nearly 9 a.m. on January 12, 2007, when emergency services were called to Cheyenne's boarding house. Paramedics and police arrived, but it was too late. Robyn was dead and had likely been dead for hours. There was vomit in her hair, and rigor mortis had already begun. An autopsy would later reveal that 18-year-old Robyn Harper died of alcohol poisoning. This obviously devastated her family back home. Robyn was a good girl. Who was looking out for her in Thunder Bay? Why didn't anyone take her to the hospital for potential alcohol poisoning to ensure she was taken care of? After all, there had been numerous adults involved in obtaining Robyn from the bus terminal. Lawyer Jonathan Rudin, who acted as co-counsel for 6 of the families who had their loved ones die in Thunder Bay, felt that Robyn's death was preventable. He accused the counselors and Cheyenne of homicide. He suggested that if she'd been taken to a hospital and treated, she would have survived. These actions, though, weren't taken. A week after Robyn arrived, she would become the 4th student to pass away in Thunder Bay. Reggie Bushie was 15 years old and starting 9th grade in Thunder Bay. He had traveled to the city from Poplar Hill, a small First Nation community with a mere 500 residents. Not much is known about Reggie's life or personality, at least nothing I could find outside of what is documented in the book Seven Fallen Feathers by Tanya Talaga. What I do know is Reggie's mother lost her husband unexpectedly, and the grief had been too much to bear. She had sent her children to live with different family members so she could grieve the loss, but also know that they were safe and being taken care of. As such, Reggie grew up with his Aunt Mary. Mary did not want Reggie to go to Thunder Bay. She was quoted in an article by CBC as saying, quote, "We did not want to let him go. We loved him and really cared for him. We did not want him to leave," end quote. Photographs of Reggie show a handsome boy with a bit of an impish grin. He has a small smile made with full lips and dark brown eyes. When Reggie initially arrived in Thunder Bay, he was placed in a boarding home. He had a hard time adjusting, though, to living life with complete strangers. His brother Ricky was in Thunder Bay too and was staying at a boarding home across the city. Reggie ended up asking Ricky if he could move into the boarding home with him, and luckily there was an extra room. The boarding parent took Reggie in with open arms. All seemed to be going okay for Reggie. Shortly after the beginning of school, though, at the end of October, Reggie and his brother Ricky decided to do something they didn't do very often. They decided to get drunk and unwind a little. The boys apparently weren't big drinkers, so when they got an invite from friends to drink by the water's edge, they thought, why not? This would prove to be fatal. It was October 26, 2007, and the alcohol was flowing freely between the group of Indigenous youth. Ricky recalls that he and his brother got pretty drunk. At one point, Ricky must have passed out because he awoke in the frigid waters of the river. After a moment of panic and disbelief, because he truly could not recall how he ended up there, he made his way to the shore and called for his brother. Reggie didn't answer, though, so Ricky continued to call out for him. Finally, deciding Reggie just must have gone home, Ricky staggered toward home, feeling drunk and cold and wet. When he got home, he went to pass out and didn't wake until the next morning. He woke up hungover and hazy. He was told by other boarders that his brother hadn't come home, but Ricky didn't worry too much about it. He figured maybe Reggie had gone home with one of their friends or was just hanging out somewhere. You never expect it happens to you. 2 days later, though, when Reggie still hadn't turned up, the missing persons report was filed. Searchers would do as they'd done many times over the years. They searched for Reggie everywhere that they thought he could be. Ricky didn't have any information other than he'd spent the night partying with his brother and some friends. At one point, he said he saw Reggie lying near the water's edge, seemingly passed out. At another point, suddenly, Ricky woke up on his back in the cold river waters with his brother nowhere in sight. Ricky became depressed and upset when Reggie still did not come home. He was full of emotions, like any of us would be: worry, fear, anxiety. Ricky was only 17 years old, hardly a person who should be considered his brother's keeper. The boys were close, they loved each other, but both made the decision that night to get drunk and have some fun. On November 1st, everyone's worst fears were confirmed. Another body was pulled from the river. The press release from the police on November 2nd stated the following: the body recovered from the McIntyre River on the 1st of November has been identified as 15-year-old Reggie Bushie from Poplar Hill, Ontario. Foul play is not suspected. Another body pulled from the river, another death where foul play was not suspected. So far in this episode, there hasn't been any proof either way, foul play or no foul play. I really do encourage you, though, to listen to the Thunder Bay podcast by Canadaland. Apparently, it's a game for the white kids in Thunder Bay to throw Indigenous kids into the river, especially if they're drunk. There have been witness accounts captured in this source that show that this is true. The Indigenous kids are beaten and then thrown into the water, and if they make it out of the water, the white kids just throw them back in again. Could this have been what happened to Ricky and Reggie that terrible October night? I guess we'll never know. Reggie was a good kid who loved his family. He wanted to have a little fun like the other kids, and he had his brother there to watch over him. Just months after leaving Poplar Hill for Thunder Bay, he would lose his life in the water. The thing is, though, Ricky knew his brother couldn't have just drowned, because Ricky knew his brother was an excellent swimmer. Hey squad, I'm going to pause for a second and just add in a little mental health break. If you or anyone you know is in crisis, please know there are resources available. You don't have to suffer alone. If you are Indigenous, the Hope for Wellness Helpline offers immediate help to all Indigenous people across Canada. It's available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to offer immediate support and crisis intervention. Call the toll-free helpline at 1-855-242-3030 3310 or connect to the online chat at www.hopeforwellness.ca. Support is available in English, French, Cree, Ojibwe, and Inuktitut. To connect with a mental health professional one-on-one for non-Indigenous Canadians, call 1-866-585-0445 or text wellness to 741-741. Okay, squad, let's get back to the rest of the episode, which will be the stories of Jordan Wabasse and Kyle Morriseau. George Bernard Shaw once said, "You use a glass mirror to see your face. You use works of art to see your soul." By that logic, Norval Morriseau's soul is stunning. If you know the name, good for you. If you don't, I'll enlighten you. Norval Morriseau was an Indigenous artist who created absolutely beautiful works of art. Seriously, check out some of his work. Bright, bold colors, gorgeous imagery. He was the creator of an artistic expression called woodland style, which is a First Nations painting genre. We actually have two pieces by him. One is in my son's room, and the other is in our basement. Norval was a self-taught artist who often painted images that came to him in dreams or visions. In Indigenous culture, all things are sacred, and dreams are considered communication with Creator. Indigenous peoples have a total way of seeing the world, and all things are interconnected together. Norval had 7 children, one of whom was named Christian Morriseau. Unfortunately, Christian passed away in 2022, but prior to his untimely death, he too learned the ways of the paintbrush and has created phenomenal works of art. On February 12, 1992, Christian welcomed a beautiful baby boy into the world. He was given the name Kyle. As Kyle grew, he would begin painting just like his father and grandfather. It was clear Kyle was gifted, and he dreamed of following in the footsteps of his family and becoming an artist himself. Tragically, though, Kyle's life would end in 2009, in none other than, you guessed it, Thunder Bay. Like so many students, Kyle was enrolled at Douglas Franklin Cromartie High School. He had aged out, again like so many others, of the education available on reserve. Kyle hailed from Kiwewin, the same community Robyn Harper had come to Thunder Bay from. On reserve, his father recalled fond memories of Kyle being a fantastic sibling and son. He loved school, he loved people, and he loved painting. One particularly sweet memory I read was that Kyle was known to give the clothes off his back to those who liked what he had. He was such a kind-hearted, giving person. Anything he had that someone else needed, he was quick to go without so they could go with. Kyle was very close to his family members, and at 17 years old, though Christian wanted to keep Kyle close, he knew he had to let him go to Thunder Bay for school. Kyle wanted to experience the city and be with other kids from the north who were shipped in to learn. Something was going on with Kyle, though, that was out of the ordinary. His report cards were coming back with poor grades when he had initially enjoyed school and did well. He was also drinking and missing curfew, when normally he was a very responsible person. Call it peer pressure, or loneliness, or a desire to numb the pain of racism directed at these kids daily, but the majority of them seemed to come to Thunder Bay and pretty quickly start partying. Kyle's family noticed something was going on when he stopped calling and checking in every night like he had been. And on October 26, 2009, a Monday, Kyle didn't return home for curfew. He had apparently been approached by 2 people at the local mall and asked if he wanted to have some drinks that night. Kyle readily agreed. Presumably, that's exactly what happened, but Kyle wouldn't be seen again after that night. A search began, typical of many of these situations where First Nations youth go missing in Thunder Bay. The search was fruitless, but the river provided the answer on November 10th, 2009. Kyle's body had been located floating in the McIntyre River by a pedestrian out for a walk on the river's edge. Initial investigation into the state of Kyle's body revealed he had burn holes on his pants and abrasions on both shins. He had alcohol in his system, but it was below the amount that would be considered fatal. Coroners ruled Kyle's death as a drowning. Thunder Bay Police Inspector at the time, a man named Don Lewis, says police have 3 theories about what happened to Kyle. Number 1, the man last seen with Kyle is somehow responsible for him ending up in the river. Number 2, the girl last seen with Kyle is somehow responsible for him ending up in the river. Or number 3, Kyle may have accidentally or otherwise ended up in the water by himself. Reportedly, Kyle's case is still an open file, but in terms of the ensuing investigation, when the man who was drinking with Kyle that night was identified, police waited 14 days to interview him in relation to Kyle's death. Interestingly, though, the police reports are not labeled as open, but rather closed or non-criminal. And apparently, according to Don Lewis, these labels are incorrect, but he was unable to provide an explanation as to how they got mislabeled. Kyle's family is obviously devastated by the loss of their loved one. Kyle had so much potential and could have gone so far in life. To get on the path to success, though, he needed to continue his education. Unfortunately, that decision, and the decision to move to Thunder Bay, would alter Kyle's path significantly. Rest in peace, Kyle. Jordan Wabasse had a love of hockey. He was born into the Wabasse First Nation. They pride themselves on a traditional Indigenous lifestyle with a large focus on hunting, fishing, and skinning animals for hides to make clothing or other goods. According to a Facebook page called Remembering Jordan Wabasse, Jordan grew up learning these important traditions. He loved his home and his family. He did things with his whole heart and enjoyed having responsibilities. Jordan played goalie on the Current River Comets, a competitive hockey team. Jordan making the team was actually a huge deal because he'd never played in a house league. So, house league in reference to hockey means playing recreational on an organized team, which is usually the first step before getting onto a competitive team. Jordan liked the Toronto Maple Leafs. He had a girlfriend named Maida, and the two were very much in love. Jordan was in Thunder Bay just like many of the First Nations youth. He was attending school in an effort to further his education. He lived in a boarding home. And like so many, he began drinking heavily. His girlfriend recalled being concerned about his drinking when she'd witnessed him having difficulty walking on more than one occasion due to being drunk. Beyond this, though, Jordan was known to be a good kid. He was good at art and enjoyed making digital art. He was active in his community. Although he was a big kid in stature, he was really just a sweet and shy kid. Photographs of Jordan show a baby-faced boy with a round face and smiling eyes. He has a head full of black hair, a strong nose, and a smile plays on his lips. He looks truly like a sweet kid. On February 7th, 2011, Jordan would be spotted getting off a bus about 100 meters away from his boarding home, so not far. He didn't make it home, however. Thunder Bay police received a tip just a few days later that Jordan may have been killed by a gang member from the gang Native Syndicate. The tipster suggested that Jordan might have been mistaken for Jordan Wabasse and was killed over an $8,000 debt to the gang. Police didn't do much with this information, though, according to a news article by the Aboriginal People's Television Network, or APTN. After the initial tip, it would be almost a month later when another tipster came forward indicating there was confirmation that a Native Syndicate gang member had killed Jordan. The name had been provided, but police had been unable to locate the individual. Still, there was no trace of Jordan at all until March, when searchers scouring the shores of the Cam River found his Adidas sneaker. A month later, Jordan's hat was found on the ice of the river, which was still frozen from the frigid winter. On May 10th, 2011, 3 months after Jordan vanished without a trace, his body was located in the Cam River. The very next day, as seems typical of the Thunder Bay Police Service, they issued a press release indicating Jordan's body had been found. Big shocker here, they ruled the death as drowning and said foul play was not suspected. The assumption was like every other assumption of former boys pulled from the river. Jordan was drunk. He was alone. He stumbled into the river, which was 3 kilometers away from where he was last seen. As an interesting little side note there. 2 days after Jordan's body was located, Thunder Bay police were contacted about yet another tip. The tipster provided the name Ariana to police and said she had first-hand information. So, police tracked Ariana down. At the time, she had a boyfriend named Stephen. The information provided to police was that Stephen had spent the night with Ariana later on in the evening when Jordan went missing. The next morning, she began talking about the fact that there were missing posters for Jordan, and Stephen admitted to her he'd run into Jordan the night before at the bridge near the Cam River. Apparently, something happened that pissed Stephen off, which led him to throw Jordan off the bridge. A friend who had been with Stephen at the time denied this happened. In late June, police interviewed Stephen, who obviously denied involvement in Jordan's death. Police couldn't find any corroborating evidence, so nothing more came of that. In 2013, though, Stephen's name came up again. One of Stephen's friends, named Riley, contacted the Ontario Provincial Police about a tip. He told police that Stephen had admitted to him that he'd been the one to push Jordan off the bridge that night, due to a fight breaking out between the two of them. At this point, the Thunder Bay Police did not interview Riley. In 2016, yet another witness came forward. His name was Kirk, and he said that Stephen had admitted he'd killed Jordan over a bag of pot. Stephen continued to deny involvement. His main reason why it couldn't possibly be true was because if he'd done it, he certainly wouldn't be walking around telling people that he'd done it. According to Stephen, that wouldn't be a very smart thing to do. In any case, nobody has been arrested or charged with Jordan Wabasse's death. Friends and family members mourn him and always will. It was another light put out too soon. Rest in peace, Jordan. Hey squad, thanks for listening to the episode. It was definitely a very emotional one to research and write. The injustices suffered by Indigenous people in Thunder Bay is shocking to me. Certainly not a brag-worthy title, but in 2013, Thunder Bay was identified by Statistics Canada as the hate crime capital of Canada. Through all of this, the complaints of human rights violations and racism within the police force in Thunder Bay have been a story as old as time. Nothing had really been done about this over the years. And after these youth died, these 7 beautiful souls were taken too soon. A coroner's inquest was launched to identify cause of death, review the reports that had been taken at the time, as well as provide recommendations on how to avoid these sorts of deaths in the future. In the next episode of Death in Thunder Bay, a special series by Crime Squad Podcast, we'll look at the rulings and recommendations of the coroner's inquest. We'll also dive into the broken trust Indigenous peoples in Thunder Bay Police Service. In 2016, an independent review of Thunder Bay Police was conducted. Sneak peek, the report said, quote, "Our detailed review of cases involving sudden deaths of Indigenous men and women found Thunder Bay Police Service investigators failed on an unacceptably high number of occasions to treat or protect the deceased and his or her family equally and without discrimination because the deceased was Indigenous." End quote. Be sure to stay tuned for future episode releases, and I'd love it if you could give a rating wherever you listen to podcasts. Also, if you're into listening to podcasts on YouTube, I'm happy to report I have uploaded all episodes on a new YouTube channel called Crime Squad Podcast. Subscribe, share, comment, all the things. It really does help me stay motivated to keep putting out content. I feel the love. Thank you as always for listening, and if you haven't already subscribed, be sure to do that so you don't miss any episode releases or bonus content. And always remember, squad, stay safe and be kind to each other.